Welcome everyone, this is another episode of Writing Inspirations with Markee Books. This is your host, Dan Ricoveri, and here we are with a new guest. Welcome, Dean Patrick. Hello, Dean.
Great. How are you? How are you, Danielle?
We are very fortunate to have you here today. So, for how long have you been a writer?
I have been a professional writer. I started my career in the early 90s, actually. I've been a professional writer for several decades now.
Okay.
And I've worked in places from biotechnology companies. I wrote for NASA, and now I write for Microsoft. And been a professional writer my whole career. As an author, my first short story was published in 2019, and I had a series of short stories in different anthologies published. And then I had my first novel published with TWB Press in 2020, and here we are now in the third one and in a trilogy that I've been working on. And met Marcus a couple years ago. We worked on the second novel together, and now this one, and that's where we are today.
Yeah, I do know that you are one of our first clients when we started this business.
That is fantastic. It really is. I finally got a chance to meet Marcus after the years we've been doing this together, and it's terrific.
I'm happy that that experience was good. So, Dean, tell us a bit about yourselves as a writer. How was your experience when you started? Did you struggle with something specifically?
I did, and it's a great question, Daniel, as we kind of look back at it. But I started writing very, very young. In college, I was always really adapt to it, and it became natural to me. And I went all through college and graduate school and just enjoyed how language works. And I knew that a career would be something that would come easily because as a writer, you can adapt to really any kind of market, any kind of team that you put your mind to. And I found that to really be something successful that way. But with fiction and horror, I chose that, and I was telling Marcus a little bit about it, but we can really dive into the story here. Today, as a matter of fact, is my 8th year celebration of sobriety, and I have fought and battled alcoholism and drug addiction all through my career, and lost jobs and opportunities, families, lost so much during that time. And came a point where I didn't know I was going to do and where I was going to go. And I was in a jail of all places, a prison rehab. And the story of this demonic woman, her name is Tara Drake. That's the character I've created. And she came about when I was in this prison rehab. And she came about one night. We were asking to write stories, and they were talking about it within, and it was just an awful environment. And I sat down one night and started to just draft this character out, and she became kind of a metaphor of addiction. And that story was published 15 years later. This was back in 2006, 2007. I was in this awful prison rehab, but that is how this character, Tara Drake, came to life. I put it in a prison rehab, and it was published in an anthology, and the name of the story is She, but Tara Drake came from that environment. And so what I did, Daniel, is I took her and I moved her into a full-blown novel, the very first book I wrote, which is called The Lady Mephistopheles, and she became more and more powerful. And I used all the experiences I went through in recovery and battling alcoholism and battling drug addiction, all of those terrible events, and honed them into these characters that would ultimately become part of this one character, Tara Drake's, really her witch's den or her cup, place, her lair, if you will. And these characters that surround her are those that I personally faced in the world of addiction and alcoholism, and I created different characters to fight her and to combat that and to go up against that. And the story just kind of blossomed from there. But it was a real struggle because it's hard to face those moments that you've had, and it's hard to craft a story that I think that people will resonate with. And also at the same time turning it into something enjoyable and scary at the same time.
It should have been very difficult to just write everything that happened to you in that way and dealing with those feelings and introspection. I really can't imagine that, how difficult it was.
It was a challenge. It's turned out for the better, though, and that's where we are now. It's a great feeling to be able to share that.
I'm happy to hear that everything turned out well. And congratulations for the 8 years of sobriety.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Then tell me, did you struggle with slumps or the creativity never stopping all this time?
You know, once it started, it has just continued to really flow. And this third book has really, really flowed for this particular character and this storyline. And I really attribute that a lot to my publisher. His name is Terry Wright, and he is the publisher of TWB Press out of Colorado. Once he accepted my first book and we started working together, the creative process became something that's now become quite natural. It's hard work, and he's demanding that way. But the process, I think it allows for me as a writer to really open up new characters and open up new doors. And that whole process has become something really natural, and that's a huge blessing. It is, but I attribute it to that. I also attribute it to the incredible support system I've had around me. My wife, Lisa, has supported me throughout this entire time. She saw me at the very worst in this troubling past that I had, and has encouraged me to write these stories and get them out and to keep going. And that's an amazing thing too. And also the friends that I've earned and the trust back with family, all of that has really allowed me to embrace these characters and these stories. And so the process has become a lot more natural. And I'm getting stronger and stronger at different things and experimenting with new things. And that's always a great feeling.
That's good to hear. Not everyone can get out of that type of situation. It's good that at least you really realized that you weren't alone.
It is, and for the support that's out there, that is something that's a miracle, really, and it's allowed for all this to happen.
So, Dean, tell us a bit about the genres of books you specialize.
I certainly will. So, I write in the genre of horror, and there's a couple of writers and editors that have read a lot of my works, and one person, his name is Doug Gibson. He's become a good friend too. He's an editor here in the Utah area, and he's kind of classified it as dark horror. And it's an interesting classification because I think a lot of horror is dark.
Yeah.
But I think if you take this character that I created, Tara Drake, and what she represents, she really is, Daniel. She's the representation of all of our addictions. She started out, and I think the character really was the metaphor for sexual addiction. And it became then alcoholism, and then drugs. And then she expanded out to something that is biblical, is satanic. And I trace it even back that far. I wanted this character to be something that is throughout time that has tempted us with everything that we've ever had, whether it's sex or food or power or politics or religion. She's taken all of that, turned it upside down, and made it monstrous. And so embracing that and fighting that, everyone who reads these books and who has gone through something hard in life can relate to. There's someone out there trying to do that to us. And this creation is what I have produced out there to really take you right to the limit. And I've had different characters battle against her. In the first book, the protagonist in it was a character based on me. And in the second book and the third book now, it's that character's brother, who's a homicide detective based on my brother, Josh, who lives in Houston, who is a police officer. He's been a detective. He's been in the underbelly of the world.
That's the typical, when you stare at the abyss, you're staring back.
That's exactly right. And like Friedrich Nietzsche would say, that's exactly what we do. Tara Drake is the abyss.
Can you explain to me a little bit about the dark horror? Actually, the first time I hear that term,
I think what it entails is a couple of things. Number one, it's a tone. It's how the story is presented, the backdrop, if you will. If you take modern horror stories like Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, for example, those monsters are, for one thing, Dracula is based off of this notion of a creature that needs to live through taking others' blood. Frankenstein's monster was a creation through science. My characters, my monsters, are based from the darkness of our own minds and what we go through and what we suffer. So I have that as an element, that backdrop. And also the writing style. I tend to use a writing style that is heavy-handed. It is deeply serious. There is a point in my stories where I'm sure readers will say, I need some kind of comic relief. And there is some of that here and there. But I think that the overall ambience and the tone and the style is what creates a dark horror story versus a horror story that's more comical.
I agree. Not every story needs to have some elements of comedy, romance, or whatever. I have seen many good movies that don't have even a single joke, and still they are like, I have never forgotten.
I agree with you completely. And you can look at films like The Exorcist, for example. When you watch that film, you can see that the director and the actors, they take the story extremely seriously. And when you do that as a writer, that's what your audience is going to feel too. They're going to feel, hey, this is really going on. I am in this. I want to find a way out of it because clearly the story is going into a bad spot, versus a story that is more lighthearted and has a comic edge to it. That's not what I specialize in. And there's nothing wrong with those stories because they're wonderful. We need those as well. But this is something that came natural to me simply, Daniel, because I lived it. And that, I think, helps a lot when you actually live these things and you kind of turn it into something that'll work in a different way.
So, about your books, how many do you have right now in total?
This will be the third novel in this trilogy. It's called The Harlot and the Beast. It's due out here in October, November, later this year. The first one is The Lady of Mephistopheles. The second one, Terra's Sabbath. That's a trilogy of this character. And I have 9 different short stories in 7 different anthologies as well. And all those works are on my website and Amazon and Barnes & Noble and so forth. But this trilogy here, I think, is something I'm just incredibly attached to it personally because it is so personal to me. But this third book has branched out into what I can already see, a fourth book, which is going to be different from this trilogy. And it's based on a character in this third book, a serial killer. Goes by the name of
universe.
I think that's a good term. You have the Marvel universe and you have these different Batman universe and so forth. It will be part of that, but the main character will be far, far different than what I've done before. And the cool thing is, these characters are based on a lot of people that I know personally, friends that I know personally. And this particular one that's going to branch out is based off of a friend of mine who's a martial artist where I train. And it's called, the character's name is Mr. Boogie. And I think that is a lot of fun when you meet people and they touch you in some way. That can become a character in your books. And that's happened a lot in my books. It happened here at the place I train, my office right now, but not the backdrop, but I train at a place called Foley's Mixed Martial Arts. And that owner of that gym, he's a character in some of these books. My next door neighbor has become a character. He was the first character in the first book. And when the pandemic came out, Daniel, when COVID hit, that's how that book started, as a matter of fact. I was out one night, and I saw my neighbor, and he had just been released from the hospital. The virus really got him, and it almost killed him. And when I saw him drive away, and he was talking to me a little bit, that's when that book just started taking off, because I used that character. I saw what could happen. And I pulled in the demon, Tara Drake, who is part of all of it. So meeting people and having these relationships and turning them into characters has been half the fun.
I don't think I ever inspired myself like real people, but I do know that many authors do that.
There's some that do. One of my favorites is Bret Easton Ellis. He is the author of American Psycho. Oh. And if you read his work, he's fantastic. And Ellis will use a lot of historical fact in his books. And so a lot of times you won't know if it's actually coming from the news or it's coming from a real journal, because he'll mix it in with his fiction. So I've done that quite a bit too with people I've met and characters I have. And I enjoy that. I kind of enjoy that quite a bit because it makes the story all the more, I think, intriguing.
That sounds incredible, actually. So tell me, are you planning to go to some event or something where your fans can interact with you?
I am doing several podcasts this summer, and hopefully there's going to be some shows at a couple of the universities around that I've done before where I can do speaking engagements. I want to get this third book out before those plans really take off. But I would like to begin, of course, my own podcast, and I would like to brand it with what Marcus has helped me do with branding, especially with the website he's helped me create. He's produced just an incredible website and the covers he's doing. So he's helping me get a brand. And as that starts to really come together more and more, he'll work with me. I'll start to put together podcast shows. But I am always open to do engagements with different types of groups out there, whether it be a writing group or whether it even be a recovery group. I think one of the things, Daniel, that has helped me is talking about recovery and addiction and alcoholism with horror, because that is a horrible thing to go through. So those two elements are something I'm trying to kind of piece together as we move forward. It's all part of the journey, and it's been something that's, I think, been a healing process as well as a wonderful creative explosion, if you will.
Yeah. So you mentioned it before that you were on Amazon. What else?
I am. My book's under Deepak, but my website is deanpatrickhorror.com. Publisher's website is TWB Press, but my books and stories are on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Book Nook. Those are the four major ones. The publisher, my own, my works are all there.
That's great to hear. So, tell me, Dean, when you created this character, Tara Drake, how did it came to you, like her appearance? Or, I know that she's a metaphor for something, but how did you conceive her identity as a person, all the nature behind her identity?
I know exactly what you're talking about. When the first book came out, and we're going through the editing process, and we were getting everything ready, the publisher sent me some images of different demonic type women, and we went back and forth with them, and none of them worked. They just didn't match what Tara Drake was and her look and feel. So during the holiday season, during Christmas time, my wife, she was at work and she was looking for some images that could match Tara Drake's look and feel. And she found this artist, this model, this Gothic model in Moscow, Russia, of all places. And her name is Alfia Mankina. And I looked at the picture that my wife sent me of Alfia, and it's on the very first book. And it was her. She looked exactly how I had always written and imagined Tara Drake to look. So what I had to do is I had to get permission to use her photography. It was very difficult. So I ended up joining the Russian equivalent of Facebook, and it's called VK. I got myself a profile out there, and I found Alfia's husband. I found him, and I sent him a message a couple days after my wife had found the photograph. I sent him a message and asked him, would you mind if we used your wife's photograph for the first cover of this novel coming out? And he, you know what, Daniel, he wrote me back within just a few hours, and it was in the middle of the night over there. He wrote me back, and he said it would be an honor. It would be an absolute honor. So we used that photograph, and it was a home run. And then from there, what they did is they did an entire photo shoot. Her and her husband did a whole photo shoot of her, and that's where Tara's Sabbath came from. And all the photographs you see of Tara Drake on my website that Marcus has worked with, they came from Alfia Mankina, and it just is an amazing story. Unfortunately, I haven't been in touch with her, though, in the past year. Since the war broke out there, we haven't been able to communicate, and it's been kind of sad that way. Alfia Mankina, she'll be part of this story forever. Finding her, having her on the website, having her on the books. So that's a great story to share. I'm glad you brought it up.
Did you manage to send at least the first book to her?
I did. She has copies of both the first and the second book. When they came in the mail, she sent pictures of her and her husband holding the books, and just an absolute honor. And I'm sure she's done what she can over there with what's going on. But she has told me, before our communication was cut off, she told me that her and her husband did what they could out there with friends and showed them. And that's an incredible story. I hope we can connect again. I really do.
I can get it. So, do you have like some author that you admire and that you base your work on?
No, I've had a lot of authors I've loved over the years that have been incredible influences. My favorite horror story and book of all is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Ooh. And I read that every year, and I think she's really the beginnings of dark horror, really. Her writing is an incredible influence on me. Bram Stoker is Dracula. His writing style was a great influence.
Between the two, I actually prefer Frankenstein, especially the ending.
I do too. I think Frankenstein's a stronger book. I think Mary Shelley, at such a young age, was just gifted in how she created this environment and this backdrop that was terrifying. It really was. So those are great influences. Early Stephen King, I've enjoyed quite a bit. But Edgar Allan Poe, his poetry and his short stories, he also puts together a backdrop that I think always influenced me. So those writers, Anne Rice, I think Anne Rice's vampire stories are far different than Bram Stoker. I think what she produced was a different type of vampire, this elegant, beautiful vampire who's just as terrifying as Dracula ever was. So those writers have always been an influence. I've looked at their styles and how they've done things. But it's an interesting point, Daniel, because the first book, at first, the publisher rejected it because the language was too heavy, and he didn't think that there was a audience for that kind of style. And the style I was using in that first book is stream of conscious style, and I don't completely use it. I just use it here and there. But that influence came from writers like James Joyce and William Faulkner. When I studied those writers in graduate school, I thought this stream of conscious way of writing, and kind of how we think. If you look at ourselves right now and what we're thinking about, we can think about something that happened an hour ago, something that we want to do in the future, something that's happening right now, and it's all jumbled together. And I chose that style in the first book here and there because when an alcoholic is spiraling into addiction and when it becomes out of control, it's very much a stream of conscious. The mind and the thinking and the actions all jumble together in this nightmarish way. So those are some other influences as well.
I understand. Well, Dean, do you have worked together with someone like co-writing something?
I hadn't. That's something I haven't ever thought about. I wouldn't ever be opposed to it. What I do, though, I am a professional editor for Microsoft, and I also help quite a few writers out. I edit a lot of my dad's works. I edit Doug Gibson's works, who is the friend and author and editor I was telling you about. So I lend my skill set to editing quite a bit with some outside writers who need that, as well as anyone really who needs that. I enjoy that quite a bit. But co-authoring something is, I've never thought about that. I think it could be something I'd really enjoy. I know Stephen King did it with Peter Straub when they wrote It. No, they didn't write It. I think that It was just Stephen King. But there's a couple books they wrote where they co-authored, and I thought that was interesting because you can see the different styles with Peter Straub and with Stephen King. So I would be open to that, absolutely.
So, like fun fact, do you have some advice for your fans or the people that hears you, or for starting out writers?
I do. If you have, I think the number one thing I would tell any writer who wants to break into the publishing world is to write what you believe in, write what comes natural to you, and if you believe in it, be competitive, find the right publisher, work hard, find a process that works for you. Like I was talking to Marcus about earlier, for me, it's scenes, scene by scene will happen. That's how I put together books and stories. But if you have the ability to outline, if that's something that works for you, then by all means find that voice and don't give up and don't quit on it, because it's worth every moment.
That's a beautiful advice. And what do you think about self-publishing?
I don't know about self-publishing. I was considering doing that early on, but I don't know enough about it. I really don't. I know that a lot of people do it. I don't think you get the kind of time, and I don't think you get the kind of exposure that you want if you find a traditional publisher. But a lot of people are doing self-publishing, and there's been a lot of success with it. I know that some self-published books have become huge bestsellers and have even become films. So I think it just depends on what you want to do. I think traditional publishing, though, is the goal of every writer. I really do, because it's a tougher route, but it has this. You have a sense of accomplishment that way. You really do.
I see. Well, Dean, I think that's all for now. I'm very happy to have you here today with us. Hope that we can talk about your next book in another interview, maybe when you start the fourth one.
I would love to, Daniel. I appreciate the time, and it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thanks to you. Well, this was Writing Inspirations with Markee Books. Thank you for coming.